The Russian FSB has raided an unusual site in their campaign for justice following the Islamist attacks in Dagestan, notably a UFC fighter's famous gym. Now, what is the connection between these Islamic terrorists, Dagestan, the UFC, and Russia itself? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about what has been one of the strangest stories about the Russian and the Dagestan connection. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is the top of the story, right? This is going to be the thread we're going to pull to go way through this rabbit hole. So, join me if you will. Right? Khabib Nurmagomedov is arguably the greatest lightweight fighter, maybe of all time. Undefeated, retired after winning the belt following the death of his father, and he famously beat the brakes off of Conor McGregor repeatedly. But he is a native of Dagestan, and you might recall the region that was subject to what's now increasingly being characterized as an Islamist-driven terror attack. But his gym that he owns in Dagestan was raided after it was discovered that one of the gunmen involved in the attack trained there as an MMA fighter. Let's look a little bit more about this, right? Footage published by Russian media outlets shows FSB law enforcement officers surrounding the gym, which is named after Nurmagomedov's late father and his coach, Abdul Manap. The raid, of course, taking place after one of the gunmen who attacked Christian and Jewish sites in Dagestan previously had trained at Nurmagomedov's gym. And what is interesting is that law enforcement just said a check of documentation is being conducted connected with the terror attacks that took place. The gunman they're describing is named Gedhidzi Himarad Kagirov, God help me, who is a master of sport. This is an honorary title provided to highly accomplished athletes in Russia. So a master of sport in freestyle wrestling who became a professional MMA fighter. He was 28 years old and was a 2-0 record while representing Khabib's Eagle MMA Fight Club. Right, this is a training facility founded by a Dagestani oligarch. Right, the club was later renamed after Khabib's father, right? So, shortly after the attack, of course, Nurmagomedov denied any affiliations with the extremists, arguing he was never a full-time student at the gym. He said it was wrong to call him a pupil of the school. This is not true. In 2021, they said he came to the gym with his older brother, sparred for a month or so. That's it. He was never seen in the gym again. But there's actually some reporting from Russia that other MMA gyms in Dagestan are facing similar raids. And we're going to talk a little bit about what this weird connection is, and what is going on, right? So, first off, to understand something about MMA fighters is that, yes, they train all the time, right? They basically never stop training unless they are injured. But when they are preparing for a fight, what they will often do is increase the intensity of their training. They'll increase the volume of their training, meaning the total hours spent training, and they will focus their training entirely on their opponent. So, for example, you might, and this period of intensification usually is about 6 to 8 weeks before a fight, and it's referred to as a fight camp. This is a throwback to boxing when boxers would literally live in a camp with other boxers away from their day-to-day life and focus entirely on preparing for their opponent, preparing for their upcoming boxing match. Now the term camp just refers to this period of intensification. So, what this fighter appeared to have done is had a fight and said, okay, I am going to increase the intensification of my training, and I'm going to do so at this elite fight gym, right? I'm going to sort of do the throwback era where I'm going to quasi live in the gym and intensify my training and do it at this elite gym, right? So that's what this guy likely did. He had a camp here. But here's the thing. You can't just show up at a gym with your gym bag and be like, I'm here for my camp. You have to be welcomed to the gym. The gym has to want you there. This is because, right, imagine you're an elite UFC caliber gym, and then some podunk jabroni from nowhere knocks on your door and goes, I'm here for my fight camp. And that person's going to bring down the level of the room, right? Somebody's going to have to spar with him. Somebody who should be sparring with another UFC caliber fighter is going to be sparring with Jim Bob, right? So these gyms, they really are discretionary with who they let in. Now, obviously, if someone is a master of sport, an Olympic or national level wrestler, they're going to be welcome in, man, a lot of mixed martial arts gyms. That kind of specialty freestyle wrestling experience really sought after, especially if you're someone who already has a 2-0 pro record as an MMA fighter. So this is probably someone who they were happy to have in the gym, another elite wrestler at a gym known for elite wrestlers. But ultimately, it's also probably, if you're kind of the kind of person that does this, it's also readily apparent who you are, right? But this sort of extremist behavior shouldn't shock anybody. Why? Because this is a part of a long-standing connection between MMA fighters and Muslim extremists within Dagestan. And here's some examples, right? So notably, the gym that got raided was Eagles MMA, right? Again, this is an outdated article. It was Eagles MMA. Now it's known by Abdul Manap. But you can see this still has primary trainers as Abdul Manap. The important thing is the notable fighters. You can see Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? UFC's single greatest lightweight ever, who's retired. But then you also have Islam Makhachev, the current lightweight champion, the UFC lightweight champion. You also have Usman Nurmagomedov, a Bellator champion, Umar Nurmagomedov, a bantamweight in the UFC, Vitaly Minakov, Russian mixed martial artist and professional competitor until 2021 for Bellator. I think he was a one-time Bellator champion, and a number of other. And Abdubakar Nurmagomedov, a Russian mixed martial artist, formerly from a former welterweight in the UFC. So formerly competing in the welterweight division of the UFC. Yeah. So you could see that this is somebody with strong connections to the UFC, right? Especially given that this is a small gym in Dagestan. Now, what's more interesting to me is where you dig deeper. And things do get weirder and deeper here. One, the gym has been very controversial, literally from the start. It was founded, yes, by Khabib Nurmagomedov, but also bankrolled by billionaire businessman Zayuddin Magomedov, a former Russian oligarch who amassed a business empire during the Dmitry Medvedev era, and was later, I believe, arrested for corruption, right? Now, in 2017, right, Nurmagomedov said unusually that 50% of his income came from the MMA gym, while the other 50% came from a Reebok sponsorship. That is very unusual for an elite UFC fighter. I can tell you that in the United States, an elite level athlete with a Reebok grade sponsorship is not going to get 50% of his income from a gym, right? This smells a little like kind of not money laundering, but this is likely a billionaire bankrolling a gym because he likes it and wants the fighters to be financially successful. That's probably what this was. Sort of like if Mark Zuckerberg was to pick up his favorite jiu-jitsu gym and say, hey, if you're a professional elite athlete, I'm going to pay your salaries and you're all making $2 million a year, right? But in 2018, the founder was arrested while preparing to travel to the United States. He was charged in Russia with embezzlement, establishing an organized crime group. He had been suspected for years of embezzling money from various projects, including a stadium in Kaliningrad for the World Cup, right? Now, first off, this is standard Russian oligarch behavior. What it really means, it should be taken as a proxy for the fact that he got ousted. He was somehow on the outs of the Russian inner circle, Putin's inner circle, right? But an investigator stated that fighters from Eagles MMA acted as a security detail for Magomedov, which made it difficult to carry out investigations. Magomedov was like, no, my security always let the government do their investigations, right? And just a few weeks after winning the lightweight championship, Khabib himself begged Putin to help Magomedov. And of course, he didn't. In December 2022, shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Magomedov was found guilty and sentenced to 19 years in prison. Then in 2018, Eagles MMA executive Denis Kloptov was arrested in absentia for the attempted murder of another fighter who was placed on an international watch list. Several other Eagles MMA staff and fighters were also arrested in absentia, suspected in being involved in the alleged attack. A group of fighters affiliated with Eagles MMA and the Sumo Group allegedly attacked the fighter, where he was hospitalized with a concussion, TBI, and a broken nose. But Kura Magomedov, the fighter attacked, did not report the assault to police. And of course, their head coach died from COVID-19. But that's just starting, right? We're just scratching the surface of this gym, because you should understand that there's a little bit more, there's even more to it than that, right? And that is through Ramzan Kadyrov. Ramzan Kadyrov himself. Ramzan Kadyrov is the strongman in Chechnya. He is Putin's ally. He is Putin's voice in the region. And he is a strange man. He's not that politically sophisticated. And I think that's why Putin keeps him around. He's never going to Wagner him. He doesn't have Prigozhin's level of ambition or sophistication. But what he does have is a weird kind of Chechen marketing sense, right? He, for example, has positioned himself at different times to sort of spin himself in different ways. Right? Kadyrov, he's a prolific social media user who has adopted a macho image where he poses with guns and military garb and poses with many mixed martial artists. But he also loves to be a rich, bougie wealth flaunter, where he wore $1,500 Prada boots in one of his military getups. As the New Yorker says, he sometimes looks like the merciless warrior in fatigue who leads special operations to kill anti-government rebels. All right, the Caucasus baron who spars with Mike Tyson, shows off his private zoo. The family man and observant Muslim who banned alcohol, ordered women wear headscarves, and boasts that his 6-year-old has memorized the Quran. Right? But he is the owner of Fight Club Akhmat, a professional sports club that focuses on boxing and mixed martial arts. Right? You might remember that he also famously bragged about his kids executing Ukrainian prisoners, having sent them to the front lines where they captured Ukrainians and then purportedly executed them. So he himself, though, has been found, Kadyrov, to be highly connected to not just his own fight club, Akhmat, but many of the Dagestan and Russian-based fighters, right? And the UFC is really deeply tied with Kadyrov. And for example, he sponsors, again, many of the fighters out of Fight Club Akhmat in the Chechen Republic, many of the Eagle MMA folks. The U.S. Treasury Department actually sanctioned Kadyrov and his fight club, his MMA gym, for their human rights violations, many times targeting individuals who were gay or weren't practicing Muslims, right? And the Treasury Department says that Kadyrov is, quote, the leader of an organization, the Kadyrov-Vitsky, that's engaged in serious human rights abuses. But more significant is that the UFC still loves the guy. For example, following a UFC event in Dubai, 3 former UFC champions at the time, Kamaru Usman, Justin Gaethje, and Henry Cejudo, visited Chechnya after Kadyrov invited them to attend a birthday party of his son and to shoot weapons at a shooting range where the soldiers train. All of those fighters mentioned are managed by Ali Abdulaziz, which is a Kadyrov-affiliated Egyptian-born MMA manager, right? Who represents fighters from Kadyrov's gym as well as fighters from Eagle MMA, right? Notably, Ali Abdulaziz was actually a New York City informant for 7 years, infiltrating Muslim communities in the United States, right? But so Kadyrov, and here is Kadyrov pictured with a young Khabib. So clearly, there's something weird going on here. Do you see the problem that Russia is finding itself in? Kadyrov is positioning himself as defender of the faith of the Muslim communities within Russia, right? He's getting, he relies on part of his power base is to convince people that he himself is this representation of Muslims defending the Muslim world. And he does so in part, you know, he wants this warrior Muslim image, right? And he needs both parts of that coin. He needs to appear to be a devout Muslim. He's very clearly not. And he needs to appear to be a fierce warrior, which he clearly is not. But by sponsoring MMA gyms and posing with fighters, Kadyrov is creating that image. And by hyping up Chechens, by, building up himself and as positioning himself as sort of a defender of a Muslim faith that's under attack on all sides, he's helping to cement himself into power and prevent challenges. The problem is that when you do that, when you play that game, you run a predictable risk, which is what we saw here, where you have these attacks against non-Muslim sites, right? You have Muslim terror attacks. And this just seems to go hand in hand with it. The Saudis have the same problem where they're allied with the US and other Western countries, but because their government needs to position itself as kind of a representation of hyper devout Muslims, it means that they also end up being a sponsor of terrorism around the world, whether it's directly in the case of many terror attacks, but also indirectly through promoting an ideology that does everything but encourage Muslims to engage in violence. So, Putin is now in a tough spot. Why? Because Kadyrov is his only ally in the region. But now, Kadyrov himself and people protected by Kadyrov are perpetrating these sort of terror attacks. And so what is Putin to do? Is he going to isolate one of his staunchest allies, someone who's been loyal to the Putin regime for an unbelievably long time, right? Or, again, you can see here's Khabib, his dad, and Putin. Interesting stuff. So, the problem, right? And this isn't the recent manifestation of a long problem, right? And you can see why. Right here, spells it out from this Sport Political article, right? Dagestani MMA fighters and their, quote, spiritual leaders have been accused by Russia's Presidential Council for Human Rights, been accused of spreading extremist ideologies. That's a clear dig at Kadyrov. It's also worth noting that Nurmagomedov was actually pictured in Dubai, Khabib, alongside Saeed Murtaliazev, an Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling, accused of financing terrorism and is a suspect in several murders. He fled Russia and is currently wanted by the Russian government, right? So you could see that this long-standing link between fighters, terrorists, fighters, think of it like this. It sounds more logical when you go, it's a link between MMA fighters and militants. And Kadyrov he uses the gyms, as we've talked about, to build his armed forces, right? A lot of people that can't make it as professional fighters are still tough dudes, just without skill in MMA. They often become members of the Chechen Special Forces, the Akhmat, right? Who are used by Kadyrov and other sort of inner Chechen leaders as strongmen to enforce their government's worldview. The problem is, again, when you play with this sort of extremification and position yourself as a defender of a faith under attack, and you cultivate this very militant mentality, you're going to get these terror attacks. So Putin has to figure out how to thread the needle. He goes, how do I stop pissing off conservative nationalist Russians who look at these terror attacks and say, hey, the government has to stop this. Putin has to sit there and go, I can't lose Kadyrov, my guy in Chechnya, because remember, before Kadyrov and his dad were in charge of Chechnya and Dagestan, but think of their single kind of region, there was a civil war, and the Chechens beat the Russian military the first time they fought. So Putin really needs to keep the Chechens from getting too pissed off. So he can't crack down too hard. So he's found himself really boxed in. And the fact that he's going after these MMA fighters is going to make the problem worse. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments if there's any other details I missed about this story, because there's so many layers to it. It's so crazy and complicated. But I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the Colonel tier members. I appreciate the Lieutenant tier members. If you're not a member of Combat Vet News, you should be. We're rolling out the new site this week, so you definitely want to become a member. And be sure to tune in for the live stream this evening. That's all I had. Thank you, guys. See ya.